My name is Liao. I serve as the chief economist and head of research at Circle. So I lead a small team of researchers working on R&D development, mostly in the prototyping space of what I call utilities that are linked to stablecoin payment. We work on a variety of topics, including privacy, including messaging. Today, I'll be presenting on a recent project we released, which is Recibo, which is a messaging standard for ERC20 tokens for receipts, invoices, and messages. So let me just start by saying that payments, stablecoins payments included, are not just about value transfers. The transferring of value is an important part of it, but I think messaging and the ability to embed message and transfer message is just as important. So let me start with some examples in the TradFi space. In correspondent banking, the key to Swift messaging system is actually a overarching orchestration of messaging standards and how correspondent banks are able to talk to each other. The actual value transfers between the banks, that's updating the ledgers of different banks. But if you think about what Swift is this messaging layer. I think that sort of messaging layer is oftentimes underappreciated in its importance. One example of this is when China developed its cross-border interbank payment system called SIPS, which was supposedly a Swift killer. Initially, it really lacked adoption, and for a long period of time, I think the issue with SIPS was it didn't have the right messaging standards. So the rest of the world was on this ISO 2022 standard, but this SIPS system was on a different standard. So banks that were trying to adopt basically fell flat in adopting. Of course, among other reasons as well, but messaging was part of the reason. Now, moving into the Web 2 or Web 3 payment space, I think there's an obvious issue of the lack of even just a memo line in payments for ERC20 transfers, especially if you are thinking about the consumer merchant payments in which there requires invoicing or linking of transactions to specific product sales, as well as on the institutional context, as I mentioned, for things like having the right institutional standards, ISO 2022, or tribal rule adoption. Those all require a way of attaching messages and embedding it with transactions. So really, there's a need for Web3 transactions to have embedding of messages. And I think confidentiality and privacy is the key here, because you don't want to necessarily broadcast that this transaction is for this merchant and this transaction is for whatever purposes, even though blockchain today is open and transparent, but you don't necessarily want to tell the world what the transactions are for. So today, there are some off-chain solutions. None of them are perfect. For instance, somebody who's using crypto as a payment rail, I actually don't know how Stripe does this, might place an item into a shopping cart. There's a signed transaction with invoice ID. And then if you want to then save those transactions to blockchain again, then you had to kind of post the transaction back, post the invoicing and the messages back onto the public blockchain. It's a very cumbersome way to link together transactions. What we introduce is a set of smart contracts. It's actually live in testnet for embedded message for ERC20 tokens. These are open source smart contracts, so anyone could take a look and fork it if you like. And Circle Research, by the way, does more of the pre-product, exploratory, open source type of research. So these are all just out for people to use. And it addressed some very key areas of not only able to attach memo lines to standard ERC20 transfers, but also embedding private messages that could be used for tribal rules and et cetera. I think we implemented a version of it using PGP, but other encryption methods, it's relatively easy to embed. So how would Recibo work for pure Web3 payments? Well, it's imagine if you have a merchant that's selling goods. When someone places a good item into a shopping cart, invoice ID is generated. But now you could actually transfer the token, transfer, say, USDC or other ERC20 tokens alongside with the invoice ID through this receivable contract. And that receivable contract then sends in the transfer function. This also works for bulk invoicing and proof of payments. Bulk invoicing is a concern as well. If a merchant is selling many goods, perhaps there's a list of items. Having a way to securely transfer that information is also helpful in this context. So Receivable is a standalone smart contract. We have the GitHub repo up and also a blog post about it. So what it is, it's basically there's a couple of new functions are introduced. Transfer with message, which allows people to embed messages, and then the receivable contract itself then calls the transfer function on ERC20. So the workflow is, for instance, Alex needs to purchase some goods, then it would basically call this transfer with message and embed a encrypted or non-encrypted message, and then receivable contract itself calls the transfer from function on ERC20. This workflow works with essentially the ERC 2612 permit construct. So you could also permit and transfer with message out in the same step. In addition, this allows for instance, the merchants to perhaps essentially have a third party to pull transactions. It also works with gas payments, ERC 3009. So you could authorize people to spend on your behalf and have gas list transactions with messaging as well. The contract interface is rather simple. There's message to, message from, some metadata about what type of encryption key that you're using. By default, we set it to PGP, but again, you could set it to non-encrypted or something else. And then there's ciphertext that you could include. Through this method, I think it's also worth to know that this is not just for embedding messages and invoices for transfers, but also, this actually is a fundamental building block for if you just want to communicate over blockchain in a encrypted and non-encrypted method. You can have back and forth, send and receive responses. Perhaps you're dealing with disputes with merchant. Perhaps you just want to send a communication pre-purchase. This protocol will also let you do that. So I do have a demo, so let me try actually live demoing it, see how it does. It's a pretty simple front end, but it plugs into the smart contract. So this is on Sepolia already. It's pretty simple. You could connect the wallet. And get some testnet USDC. You could select the pre-defined, well, basically you had to add in someone's contact. You don't have to use the real name and their address. So I'm going to send it to, for instance, my colleague, Alex Kruger, with a message called, "Hi from Denver." And then it's optional for how much USDC you want to send. And you can send that message. Of course, there's signing. And great, now the message is confirmed on testnet. And the recipient on the other side can read the messages once you connect to the wallet. So there's this message that I sent recently, but I also received message from Alex a couple days ago, or from my colleagues, Mira. So that is the quick demo. By the way, the demo interface is also, we open sourced it, so people can see how it works. So that's it. Check out our blog post and demo. Here's a QR code. And on the other stuff that Circle Research is working on, stablecoin, as you know, it's right now the smart contracts are relatively simple, but we think there are so many other features, as the previous panel mentioned, so many other features we could add And we're constantly evolving and thinking about the business model as well, thinking about ways in which we could leverage the smart contracts to generate new ways of generating revenue, perhaps, but also to provide new features to the users. Thank you so much.